Mr. Mick Mulvaney joins us live this morning. Hello, good morning.
To talk about baseball.
Do you know the answer to that?
I couldn't hear what you're saying. I'm sorry. I would love to participate in baseball discussion.
We'll talk about some more important stuff because Americans really want to talk about health care, and many people have said they just want to move on. You even have the leader, Mitch McConnell, who's saying, let's move on, let's focus on tax reform. Do you think that's the appropriate reaction?
I understand why the leader's saying that, but at the same time, I think it is important that we still deal with the issue. I don't know how. Remember, 7 months ago, I was an elected member of Congress. I don't know how you run saying something for 7 years that we'll repeal and replace Obamacare if you give us the House, if you give us the Senate, if you give us the White House, and then when the voters give that to you, you don't follow through on that promise. That's the type of mistake that really follows through to haunt you in the future if you don't fix it. So I do think it's important they continue to work on health care.
So the president's sense and feeling on this, we saw the tweets he sent out over the weekend, keep going, don't vote on anything else. That remains the position of the White House. We want to get repeal and replace done.
Obamacare's still broken. It was just as broken today as it was last week, in fact, more so. The president is not giving up on this, and I think what you're seeing from the White House is encouragement to the Senate, especially the Senate, to stay and not give up either. If the president's not giving up, they shouldn't give up.
Well, it could be even more broken this morning. If you saw the Wall Street Journal report last night, we got the alert sort of right before bedtime that some insurers now would be seeking a 30% increase just to cover these costs. States with increasing premiums rising 30%. Idaho, West Virginia, South Carolina, Wyoming, and then 20% in Tennessee, Hawaii, North Dakota, New Mexico. It's broken already.
Yeah, I'm real excited about that since I still buy mine in South Carolina. But don't worry, remember, with Obamacare, your premiums were going to go down by $2,500. So this is what we've been talking about. So much of the discussion is focused on, well, what would this bill in the Senate do, or what would that bill in the Senate do? And I think a lot of us have lost focus on the fact that the system we have doesn't work. Obamacare doesn't work. People are suffering today because of Obamacare. People cannot go to their own doctor. Some people can't go to the doctor at all. Some people cannot get coverage at all because of Obamacare. That should be the beginning point of the conversation.
Yeah, but one of those proposals, you said there's been various proposals, different iterations, and some have been scored, some have not. One, it was proposed more recently by Senator Lindsey Graham, wants to block grant a lot of the money to the states and provide a lot more authority to the states to determine how they provide health care. Well, this is how the senator described his plan. Take a listen.
Instead of trying to redo Obamacare in Washington, why don't you turn to the governors who have done a great job doing a lot of things, including health care, and take all the money you would spend in Washington on health care, block grant it back to the states, and let them design health care systems closer to your family. This would empower state choice. It would empower consumers. Punish me in any way you think is appropriate if I can't fix your health care. You sent us up here, the American people, to repeal and replace Obamacare. This is the end of single-payer health care. If you take the money and the power out of Washington and give it to the states, that's the end of Bernie Sanders' dream. There'll never be single-payer health care because the money and the policies out of Washington.
I mean, Republicans have long ran on pushing more authority down to the states. Is this the answer?
It absolutely is, and I hope that Lindsey and his friends in the Senate do get some traction on that. I was in the state legislature in South Carolina, then I served up in the national legislature. I didn't get any smarter. All I got was further from home. Folks back home in the state legislators, governors back home, live there. They know what's going on there. They have the ability to respond better there. We knew how we could provide care better in South Carolina when I was in the state legislature. So this idea of federalism, this idea of taking this very complicated, complex thing, draining it out of Washington, draining the swamp a little bit, sending stuff back to the state governments is a tremendous idea, and I hope they get traction with it.
Let's talk about tax reform, because it seems like that's where Republicans are turning their attention right now, even during this recess. And this comes as we're about to, today, we could hit 22,000 as the Dow could crest 22,000 for the very first time. The president yesterday talking about, and there you see the numbers right there, 21,000 at this hour. President yesterday talking about small businesses, and we're entering this golden age now for small businesses because we could remove all of these restrictions. And yet one of the main things that the president's focused on is tax reform. And we heard from Democrats yesterday, Mick. Democrats seem to come out. They kind of unified. 45 of the state Senate's 48 Democrats came out and signed this 6-paragraph thing. And here was what they said. They said they don't want to increase the tax burden on the middle class. They don't want this to benefit just the wealthiest individuals. They want to have an open, regular order when they're voting, and they don't want to add to any deficits. What about the Democrats' proposals here? Can you work with them?
it seems that the one thing the Democrats have been unified in since this administration came in is opposing this administration. We have a long conversation about the confirmation process, a long confirmation about every single time we call them, they say that they're not willing to work with us. So they'll say that to the television, but they won't say that to us behind the scenes, which is frustrating. But tax reform, look, what we were able to do last week I thought was important. It didn't get that much attention. When we unveiled what they call the Big Six agreement, those principles, that was a huge step in the right direction. People said, well, you know, there's no details. But what you saw there was an agreement on the fundamental principles, the fundamental ideas that all Republicans, House, Senate, and the White House agree on tax reform. That's a huge step in the right direction. I wish the Democrats would look at those proposals and see that many of the things that they want are contained in those principles as well.
Do you think Republicans can get this passed without even needing the Democrats' votes?
Well, again, that's the idea, because, again, you have a choice. You can either try and do it with 50 votes in the Senate using what's called budget reconciliation, or 60 votes in the Senate without. But my gut is that a tax bill looks a lot weaker, a lot less likely to get us to 3% economic growth if we've got 8, 10, 12, 14 Democrats on it. We need this tax reform. Let's not lose track of this. Why are we pushing this so hard? We're trying to get the American economy back at its old normal, which is at 3% economic growth, and get out of this rut that we were in with the Obama administration of growth under 2%. That's absolutely critical, and tax reform is a central feature in that.
And because if you decode what the Democrats' demands are, they're talking about deficits, which is the ultimate irony, because they're the party that drown us in debt.
He laughed.
Yeah, I mean, regular order. Go ahead.
That was the softball question. I was going to let you guys take that one. So.
Okay. I mean, it's so obvious. It's almost doesn't need to be mentioned.
Well,
but do you really think? I mean, is it even worth going through the process when there's such a diametrically different view of the world? They want to tax and spend. They believe in class warfare. The regular order means muck it up. And ultimately, can you bring 50 senators together, though? And if the Republicans can't bring 50 senators together on tax reform, on cutting taxes, then what in the world are Republicans stand for at all?
No, we can, because you're absolutely right. If you stop to think about it, the party was not necessarily united, at least we're finding out now that it wasn't, in terms of how to deal with Obamacare. There's a lot of folks who ran saying they wanted to repeal Obamacare, but when they got the chance, they didn't do it. I'd like to think there's a much more fundamental support across the Republican Party for tax reform. That means lower rates. That means a simpler tax plan. I don't know of any Republican, even privately, who doesn't like that idea. So I'm cautiously optimistic that tax reform will actually be easier than health care. Again, it's all important because you have to have every single... We unveiled this idea about 2 weeks ago called MAGAnomics, which was this unifying theme of everything we're trying to do. Tax reform, health care reform, regulatory reform. One of the reasons you saw the small businesses so excited is what we've done on regulatory reform. All those things together can get us back to a truly sustained, healthy American economy, but we need to have each and every one of those pieces.
All right. Mick Mulvaney live with us. Well, if we don't see you in New York, I'll see you in South Carolina. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you. I love that statement. Just because I went to Washington doesn't mean I get smarter. It just means I get further from home.
I know.
It's true. I mean, Washington thinks they know better than everybody else. Push it back to the legislatures. These guys know how to govern, too.
Home's pretty good when you're from South Carolina.
That is true.